From the PEN studios in Chicago, you're listening to This or That with your hosts Paul Grote and Scott Sanders.
We've got an interesting episode planned for this edition of This or That, and it's kind of a follow-on. Earlier we talked about the name, image, likeness new rules in college football, and Paul advocated for the nil rules, and I advocated against. And so this time we're going to talk about the transfer portal. We're going to each take a side and try to win you over to our specific positions. Paul's going to advocate for pro transfer portal, for the freedom of player movement within the college ranks, and I'll advocate against the ability to move in the transfer portal. But just to sort of level set things, there are over 3,000 college football players in the transfer portal. 1,400 at the highest levels, the FBS level, the bowl subdivision, but there's also over 1,600 players at the FCS level, the championship level, that are in the transfer portal. So it's a wave of student athletes that are looking for new homes and have entered the transfer portal. Again, over 3,000 combined. So, Paul, you're going to advocate in favor of the transfer portal. How are you going to, what's your opening salvo?
I'm going to keep it short and sweet, Scott. I think the appropriate starting point is just, why should players not have the same freedom as coaches or university presidents or any other students to be able to transfer?
Yeah, and it's tough to argue against freedom. I had the misfortune of trying to argue against freedom for the name, image, and likeness thing, and I'm on that side now. And, but I'll give it a shot. And I knew at some point in time you'd go to, well, coaches can move, so why can't players?
Sure, yep.
And so I'm going to try to separate that to say, all right, here's a unique situation where a coach has left. And I'll argue that point later. But to me, the broader point of the coach hasn't left, I'm just unhappy. I don't like my school. I don't like most often it's playing time. I don't like my position on the depth chart, so I'm going to transfer, right? And so I'll treat that as the broad condition that I want to advocate against, because I too agree that a case can be made that my coach left, so why do I have to stay here? Particularly as it relates to a different system or something like that, or, the coach recruited me, I've got a good relationship with him, but without that good relationship, now I'm starting over. If I'm going to start over, I might as well do it somewhere different. Right?
So you're okay with that? So
well, I'm more okay.
You're more okay. So you're saying if the coach leaves, this is the guy that recruited me, this is the guy that said, I'll be starting by the time I'm a junior, et cetera, et cetera. Now this guy's gone. I'm not sticking around. I don't have any loyalty to anyone else around here.
Exactly.
That's okay.
Yep. Right. But so that other condition where the coach hasn't left, I'm just unhappy. And that's the one that I want to advocate against. And here's my number one argument for not having a transfer portal. The way it used to be before the portal is you had to sit out a year if you transfer. With the transfer portal, you only get one free movement. If you utilize your free movement in the transfer portal, with your second school, you're stuck. If you want to transfer from there, you do have to go back to the old rules and sit out again. And to me, that sort of Damocles over the head of the player that, hey, he's already made his transfer. I've got him. It doesn't matter to me where I put him on the depth chart. He's going nowhere. I can treat him however I want to as a coach or a staff. That, to me, is the big problem with the transfer portal. I think it's better for the students if I want to move, I've got to sit out a year. That's not the end of the world. I'll grow as a person. I'll get my grades in shape. I'll be able to complete a graduate degree, with that extra year, those types of things. I don't think it was the end of the world to have to sit out a year before. And so this idea of the transfer portal allowing free movement leads to a situation where at that second school, players are in trouble. I'll give you some more details about that, but Paul, I want to get your reaction on, this idea that, hey, it's only a one-time use of that trump card.
Well, I think, though, that it's still a step in the right direction as far as player freedom goes, because, under the old system, you'd have to sit out a year, and I don't know if there was a limit to the number of times you could transfer before this new rule, but it kind of de facto is a limit, because if you have to wait a year every time you transfer, practically speaking, you're not going to you're not going to transfer more than once. So it feels like even though there's a one-time transfer only, rule, just the fact that they don't have to sit out for a full season. I mean, the things you said have merit. I mean, sure, yeah, that's great. Let this, this kid while he sits out, he'll, maybe focus on grades, and maybe he'll put himself in that position or herself in that position where she can have that kind of senior year where they don't have any classes. You have a few players like that, and they can just focus on their sport, maybe go pro. That's great. But again, I mean, that should be the player's choice. I mean, the player And it seems to me that there, and maybe Scott, I mean, is there a rule against sitting out? Like, does the player still have that option? Hey, I've played 2 years for school X. I'm now going to take a year off and then, try and get ahead of my academics and then, move on and finish my final 2 years at school Y.
Yep. Well, they've got a redshirt capability, and they've got an injury, medical redshirt capability as well. And you brought up the point there that I should have clarified when you mentioned a woman. We're just talking right now about college football athletes, but this transfer portal condition exists for all, college sports. And so who knows how many thousands of athletes at the other sports are in here as well. Particularly, college basketball. The portal is used heavily in college basketball as well. But just give you a couple anecdotes, and I used different anecdotes when we were talking about the name, image, and likeness thing. Just the other day, 2 quarterbacks from the transfer portal both signed with Virginia Tech. And, they're cooked. They both did it on the same day, and I'll bet that they didn't know that the other one was going to be signed. Right? So now they're stuck. They've signed their paperwork as a transfer portal quarterback. No, they don't have to sit out. But what the situation they thought they were walking into is no longer the case.
Sure.
And they're done. They're going to have to sit out a year now, if they did. Right?
Yeah.
So they've lost all their flexibility.
Yeah.
And the coaches, and that staff can do whatever they want to them. Right? That's just one example.
So, my response to that would be, shame on Virginia Tech. My guess is that they're not obligated to tell these guys, hey, oh, by the way, we're also bringing in your clone from this other school. You guys are going to have to battle it out. One of you guys is going to be benched for the rest of your career, possibly. But that story is now out there. And if I am, the next quarterback looking to transfer, boy, oh boy, I am not going to go to Virginia Tech. And wherever I'm going, I'm going to make sure I've got good representation, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to know, I want full transparency from the school. I want you guys to show me all of the people you're considering bringing over, because that's going to influence my decision. So, good point, Scott. I mean, I can't argue against, that's a good point on your side of the argument. I guess what I'm saying is that it illuminates a problem in the system, and I think going forward, other players and other universities should learn from that.
Sure, it's definitely a ding on the Hokies there.
Yeah.
So another point that I want to advocate against the transfer portal, and some of this is picking around the edges, again, just like it was with NIL. I would like to see, if we're going to have a transfer portal, that it doesn't kick in until your sophomore season. There's so many players who are transferring after their freshman year that they're not quite giving it a chance. Right?
Yeah.
Things can shake out very differently. In the longer run. And the fact that they're sort of, again, dropping their trump card or shooting their one bullet, that they have after their freshman year, and the fact that they're going to have to be stuck then at that next university, I just don't think they've given it enough time. I also think that maybe perhaps they're not mature enough. There was a quarterback at Ohio State this past season who had over $1 million in endorsement money, a quarterback from high school in Texas. And he went to Ohio State, didn't play. They've got a different quarterback, and now he's transferred out of there. He did get his $1 million in endorsement deals, right? But he's already moved on without ever seeing the field in a meaningful way for Ohio State.
Sure.
So I'd like to see that the transfer portal, if it's going to be in place, that it doesn't kick in until after that freshman season.
Sure.
They've still got 3 seasons to play, right? And if they're good, they're only going to be obligated to play 2 more seasons before they're draft eligible. Right. So in the long run, it won't have a negative effect on their pro earning power, right? But I think they'd be in a better position, both their awareness level, their understanding of it, right, for their current condition and their longer-term condition. Right? That they essentially never stop getting recruited if they're going to transfer after their freshman year.
Good
right?
point.
You're sitting there on a staff right now and you're like, who's probably unhappy with their depth chart position after their freshman year?
Right.
And those are the ones they want to go after, because now they're stuck for the remaining 4 years of eligibility, right? So I'd like to see it at least move to that second level.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment. Like, I think absolutely, a kid, I mean, geez, you're a freshman. There's a really good chance, especially if you're at a big program, you're not going to see a lot of playing time your freshman year, especially at certain positions like quarterback. So as a kind of point of, are they mature enough to make that sort of a decision? I would agree, Scott, they're not. But again, they have the right to make poor decisions. I hate seeing it. But I would, if I, for example, had a son or a daughter who was playing NCAA sports, and they called me halfway through, Dad, I hate this. I'm leaving. I'm going to go on the train. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Let's, you're not even halfway through the season yet. You're talking about making this decision. Let's think this through. I think that, so I agree with the sentiment. I 100% agree. And if I was, in the position to influence one of these athletes, I would, kind of all things being equal, I would counsel them to stay put. Get through your freshman year, get through your sophomore year. But again, they have the right to make poor decisions, unfortunately.
It's tough to argue against freedom. Yep. Absolutely. All right, so we're through our first segment here. Let's take our first break, and we'll come back and we'll sort of do some more point and counterpoint, pro and con for the transfer portal for NCAA athletes. Please do get in touch with the show. The PEN listener hotline is area code 833-763-7638.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
What if wearing underwear could feel better than going commando? Like if the waistband didn't roll or dig, and the fabric made you sweat less, and the whole thing moved with you, never against you. At Mack Weldon, we're reinventing men's basics, starting with your underwear. Introducing AirKnit X, our lightest, most breathable technology, engineered with 4-way stretch. If you don't love your first pair, it's free. So try one today at MackWeldon.com.
Follow This or That on Twitter at PodEntertain.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
And now, back to This or That on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
So I'm arguing on behalf of against, I guess, the transfer portal. That the cons outweigh the positives for it. And just like when we talked about the name, image, and likeness, that this is good in theory. It's the execution where the problems set in. And so Paul and I are going back and forth with Paul advocating for the transfer portal. And we talked about some topics prior to the break, but right now what I wanted to get into is sort of this idea of playing time expectations. That it used to be if you were at a powerhouse program, you waited your turn. Right, that you expected that the senior or the junior with more experience and more physically developed would sit in front of you atop the depth chart. You waited your turn, you got your opportunity, you made the most of your opportunity, and on it went. But with the transfer portal looming over every head coach decision, every playing time decision, every depth chart decision, the situation now has become, I better satisfy that hot freshman or he's gone. And that changes the dynamic. It changes the coaching decisions. It changes the product on the field. It changes the locker room in that, you've got a junior sitting there who knows at this moment, I'm better than that hotshot freshman that they signed this past offseason. Yet the meritocracy is gone. They're going with placating the freshman just to keep him on the roster over the guy who's been here for 3 years and earned it. And I think that creates a dynamic that's unhealthy in the long run. Paul, what are your thoughts about this expectation around playing time and such?
Really interesting point. That is a dynamic that probably does now exist and will continue to exist. And some thoughts I would offer are maybe this leads down the road to more balance in the various conferences and leagues and kind of haves and have-nots in NCAA football, Division I football. Think about the idea that maybe the Alabama coach will decide, well, maybe I don't need to recruit this guy because there's no way this dude is going to get playing time on this offensive line for at least 2 seasons, because I have way too many guys ahead of him that are better or a year more experience or whatever. So now that person winds up going and playing for something like Jackson State in the news recently.
Sure.
Not related to this, but related to name, image, likeness. So I could see some scenarios like that starting to play out. So that would be one thing. Another thing that I would offer is maybe this sharpens up some of the coaching, and it gives another dimension that the coaches need to be considering. A good coach isn't just going to put the best players in the lineup on game day and get them prepared and have great practices and be a motivator and blah blah blah. They're going to get to know their players, and they're going to talk to these guys that are the 5-star recruits that aren't going to be able to play, and find out what motivates them. Talk to them and as an individual, and it's going to give an advantage, I think, to the coaches that are better relationship builders and more able to connect with their players. From day one.
Yeah, it certainly favors those who communicate well.
Yes,
right. That keep their whole roster engaged and such.
Make them feel important. Make those. They always say, like in business, hey, that's a great leader over that person. He'll come into a room and he treats his peers and his superiors exactly the same way as he talks to the person that comes in and serves coffee. Same idea here.
So it's interesting the point you bring up related to the haves and the have-nots, and it reminds me exactly of the conversation we had when discussing nil, that we each took a position, and if I recall, your position was that these nil opportunities will allow the second tier of teams to emerge, right? That a new powerhouse who nails nil, who gets the name, image, and likeness stuff down well, can leapfrog or at least climb the ladder to compete with the big boys. And doesn't the transfer portal provide that same opportunity, right? And so it's funny that you're on the same side of that argument, and I'll take again the opposite side of that, not just for the nature of the show, but because I truly believe it, that if somebody like Alabama or Georgia, one of the blue blood programs, Ohio State, if they miss in recruiting, they've got an easy avenue to plug that one hole. Right? Who's in the transfer portal? Who's the best at that position in the transfer portal? Let's take them. And now, all 22 of my positions are nailed.
Yeah.
Right? Even the special teams, hey, I had a bad kicker last year, and, so now I went out and got the best kicker in the portal. And so those halves have the ability to plug their holes easily to repair, any missteps that they might have. And so, in each situation, for nil and the transfer portal, they're new enough now where both of our arguments are logical, right? You could see where nil would give the second tier team an opportunity to climb the ladder, or you could see where the existing fan base and the existing infrastructure and all that makes the powerhouses even more powerful.
Right.
The same is true of the transfer portal, and we're going to have to just wait and see how it plays out. We did see an opportunity, or at least a evidence of it working both ways this past season. So Michigan State was primed for a down year, right, through coaching changes and recruiting misses and what have you along the way. They managed to jumpstart their rebuild through the transfer portal, bringing in several new players, including their leading running back, and had a much better season, ranked in the top 10, all of that through, great use of the transfer portal. Then we also saw Notre Dame plug a hole. They had lost their quarterback of the future as a transfer to Boston College, had a gap, realized that their incoming freshman wasn't going to be ready. He had to sit out his senior year of high school due to COVID. And so he, waiting on the depth chart, Notre Dame had this gap, and they were able to fill it with Jack Cohn, the transfer through the portal out of Wisconsin. So both situations came true, both for power programs, one making great use of the portal, right, to rise up above expectations, and the other to plug those holes. So, we'll have to wait and see how each of these two major seismic shifts to the college athletics landscape play out over time, nil or what we're discussing today, the transfer portal.
Yeah, absolutely. And the possibility to break more in favor of the haves of these top elite blue blood programs is there. It's really interesting forecasting and talking about it and talking through the different scenarios. And certainly I kind of laid out the case for how this should help the second tier schools get more toward first tier. But your point, your counterpoint is well made and well taken.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so let's take our second break, and then when we get back, I want to jump into, as it relates to this topic of the transfer portal, the impacts on recruiting. Essentially, that the recruiting carousel, the recruiting minefield. The recruiting efforts never stop when you've got a transfer portal in place for college sports. So stick with us. We'll be right back on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
This or That is brought to you by...
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
We started Untuck It to help guys look sharp and feel casual. Because traditional shirts just weren't meant to be worn untucked. Untuck It shirts fall at the perfect length and are designed for guys of all shapes and all sizes. So now everyone can experience the perfect fit of an Untuck It shirt.
At least somebody made the right call.
Want to get in touch with the show? Email us at thisorthat@podcastentertainment.com. Enjoying this podcast? Be sure to check out all the other PEN podcasts by visiting www.podcastentertainment.com. And now, back to This or That on the Podcast Entertainment Network.
Welcome back to the show. This is This or That with your hosts Scott Sanders and Paul Grody. Today we're discussing the transfer portal, pros and cons, the transfer portal within college athletics, particularly football, college football. Please get in touch with the show through the PEN listener hotline and let us know whether you favor or are against the portal and what your thoughts are. 833-763-7638. So the last major point I want to make, Paul, is the impact on recruiting with the transfer portal in existence. And so, if you're an elite high school athlete, you may start to get recruited all the way down to middle school, but it really gets hot and heavy around your sophomore year if you're a football player. And extends all the way through, typically the end of your junior year when you start to, get to that decision time and the letter of intent. And once that letter of intent is signed, the recruiting wave can lighten up a little bit and you can go back to being a student and a student athlete. But with the existence of the portal, recruiting never stops. You certainly have your regular high school recruiting, and then you have, if you enter the portal, a full-blown second set of recruiting activities imposed upon you or, that you have to go through. But I'll even advocate that it goes further than that because athletes aren't sitting in the portal very long before they make a decision such that that tampering is going on where they're being recruited in the shadows throughout that time.
Yeah.
There's a coach sitting there today looking at a player and his situation and saying, that's not ideal. That kid's third on the depth chart.
Right.
Why don't I get in touch with him or his representatives or, his high school coach?
Yep.
Right. Let him know that we're there for him if he's ready to do that. And so that recruiting, never stops. And I don't feel that that's a good outcome for the student particularly, right? Before the game, for the universities, for that whole process to have recruiting be a nonstop event for a student, as they go through their time. And we focused a lot on freshmen. Just one more thought before throwing it over to you.
Yeah.
We focused a lot on freshmen, but a high amount of these transfers are senior transfers, right? One last year. I've done 4 years at my school. I want to be a grad transfer, so I'm going into the portal. Many teams, Nebraska had a 4-year starter, Adrian Martinez. He just transferred. So it isn't just that it's, high school and one more year because we're going after these freshmen. That recruiting is going on even ultimately until you're a fifth-year senior.
Right. Yeah, you're correct that I'm sure there's absolutely recruiting going on, and some of it's probably can file it under corrupt recruiting. I don't know what the rules are. If the idea is that the student athletes are ideally just supposed to kind of volunteer to go into the portal, or if it's like the conversations happen. Hey, one coach from a different program, gets word to the, if you were in that portal, who knows? I'd probably snatch you up tomorrow, kind of thing. Conversations on the side. I don't know what the rules are around there, but it feels slimy. It feels if not illegal or against the rules, it's at least something that's not the right thing.
And there's so much opportunity for it to happen.
Yeah.
You have everyone who recruited you when you were in high school, right?
Yeah.
Then you have, coaching staff changes, not just head coaches, but position coaches or things like that. Hey, I was your running backs coach at, the school you first chose. Now I'm over here at this rival school, but I have a relationship with you. I know your phone number. I know your high school coach. I know your dad.
Yeah.
I've had barbecue in your kitchen.
Sure.
That kind of thing. So I'm just staying in touch. We're friends now.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, enter the portal and I got a spot for you.
So, I think with this, it's you raise a good point, and by the thing that I would kind of offer in return is again I'll kind of fall on the character of the kid and the parents, and once they make that decision to commit, they should be committed. And again, the parents have to be the parents, and the NCAA should not be in the position where they have to put all these rules in place, because it's kind of almost like they're assuming that there are no parents, or that these kids aren't getting counsel from people that are, whether they're their parents or siblings or uncles and aunts or good friends. There's a whole bunch of people in their local community that have their interests at heart, and that's what needs to be trusted here. Just because there's some overly aggressive coach that absolutely has to have this kid and will bend if not break the rules to get this kid to go into the portal, and they're being recruited for 4 years, in my opinion, not healthy. What I'm saying though is that a kid with a strong character and good people in his corner can stand up against that. And say, no, I made my decision. I'm staying here, and that's the way it is. So you can recruit all you want. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I like where I'm at, and I'm not playing this year, but it's going to. I trust my own skills. I'm going to beat out these guys, and I am going to be able to play. And the other thing I would offer is that we're kind of operating under the assumption that this will turn into the Wild West, and that all these kids will want to transfer. And okay, 3,000 kids in the portal. It's a non-insignificant number. I'm not sure how many kids are playing college football, total. We can figure that out, certainly, kind of figure out, hey, what's the percentage? 3,000 out of what? What percentage actually is that? Is that a significant amount? But I think over time, as this thing goes on, it's possible that, transferring isn't all that hot. A lot of kids will maybe there'll be kind of a big bump at first, and then after a while it'll settle down, and kids won't transfer. So that's kind of how I see that.
Well, so just some back of the envelope math at the FBS level, there's a little over 10,000 scholarship athletes, right? And so 1,400. Is a big percentage, right? You're talking about 14%.
14%, yeah.
Yeah, but it just started, so there's this rush, this wave, of transfers. That the steady run state, let's just even say it's half of that. That's 7%. That sounds more manageable, right?
Right. So, in some of these things that I brought up earlier, the idea that you're bringing up the idea that recruiting never stops. I brought up the idea earlier that certain coaches might kind of stay away from certain players because they know that once they bring that kid onto the team, he's a constant flight risk. And hey, let's leave him alone, and let him go play for the so-called second-tier school, and that's where he winds up going, and he does great. And so in other words, you're reducing the number of potential transfer type situations through these thousand variables that we can't even think of right now. So you don't know how it's going to break. So
one other point I wanted to make, and really it's a point for your side. I mentioned at the beginning that let's carve out this idea that the head coach changes, right? Because the coaching carousel goes, and their coaches are able to jump at a moment's notice, for seemingly any reason. Most often it's monetary, right? Or a coach gets fired. I'm all for the portal in those instances, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The whole dynamic of that school has changed, and I'll go so far as to say that shouldn't even count as their one change.
Sure.
Right? Their one opportunity in the portal. That there should almost be this coaching portal, not for coaches, but my coach changed, and therefore I'm in that portal.
Oh, right. Separate. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I get to leave because my coach left.
Yeah. So and that's a point in favor of the portal. So I'll certainly give you that. And typically we're pretty balanced in each of our advocating for our positions during this podcast, but for this one, because it's such an obvious argument to be in favor of the transfer portal and in favor of freedom, I've been chipping away at it through most of the episode. Do you want to add any, sort of closing thoughts advocating on behalf of the portal?
Sure. I mean, last thing I'll say, Scott, is why not? And in the spirit of, we are in a situation, or had been in a situation, the NCAA was in a situation where transferring was really not practical, for the students. So it was, practically zero freedom to, well, let's try something. It's an experiment. And we're not talking about a life or death situation here. These kids are, they're great athletes. They're going to go be successful somewhere. They've got a great opportunity. It's kind of a first world problem. If we can make it better, we can. And so why not do the experiment of the portal? Let's see how it goes. Let's get through, maybe 4 years, right? One full cycle, 5 years, I guess. We talk about the 5-year scholarship, including a redshirt year, and look at the data. See if that 14% settles down to 7%, and it's kind of like, the big nothing burger. 7%, not that big of a deal. Let's just roll with it. Or, maybe it's a complete dip. Maybe it jumps to 50%. Maybe something crazy happens. So it's a nice opportunity to collect real data, rather than kind of all these people trying to imagine the different scenarios and arguing with each other about why something is going to be a disaster or going to be great, et cetera, et cetera. I love the idea of just doing the experiment. I don't see some terrible downside to doing this experiment and seeing what happens and getting smarter, and then making adjustments in the future. Kind of really similar to the one and done experiment that was done in the NBA a few years ago.
And I like how they back that up, or they walk that back.
Yeah.
That you think, hey, the toothpaste is out of the tube at the transfer portal. We can never go back to a different condition. But they did in the NBA, so,
anything's possible.
Yeah, exactly. So 2 seismic shifts in
Yeah.
The name, image, likeness opportunities now for college athletes in the transfer portal. And they're interrelated, to a degree. We had mentioned that for the NIL, that we'll come back and talk about it at a later date. We'll have to do the same thing, with the transfer portal, and maybe we'll bring in some expertise, on firsthand experiences as it relates to both the portal and the name, image, likeness conditions as we do this, sort of real-time experiment at the college athletics level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be great to revisit in a year or two and kind of do a checkpoint, see where things are going.
Fantastic. So thanks for your time, Paul. Listeners, please do get in touch with the show. Area code 833-763-7638. That's 833-PODSNET. Or email the show, this or that, at podcastentertainment.com.
Want to stay informed of new episodes on your favourite shows? Sign up for the PEN Listener Club at www.podcastentertainment.com. Thank you for listening to today's episode of This or That.